Can you give me an idea of how big the business was when you sold?
At the point of sale, we were doing about 16 million in top line revenue. We had really healthy margins.
Those businesses are usually like 40% margins starting out, right?
Our margins actually were up in the 60+% range.
Oh, jeez. Why would you ever sell? I mean, that just seems like you just have a money printing machine.
It was a lot, right? And it was a sacrifice. I've got 5 kids. My wife's amazing, but like I wasn't around those years.
Tell me a little bit about your background. What have you done? You had a recent exit and now you're in the wilderness. What are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, as I look back, I mean, as an investor, a board member, even an operator, I've been involved with a number of companies over the years. But the main company I've spent my time building over the past 15 plus years is an employee benefits, brokerage, and consulting firm, where we've worked with employer organizations to develop a strategy and manage their employee benefit programs, primarily insurance coverages, medical, dental, vision, life, disability. Our business model was unique in that we didn't simply broker packaged plans or products that insurance carriers were putting out there. For the vast majority of our clients, we were actually custom building and then assisting our clients to partially self-fund those programs over time. So this would be like an alternative to buying a fully insured plan from a carrier.
So that was going to be my question. Were you working with primarily companies that were self-insured or self-funded?
Primarily, yeah. I mean, we worked with employer groups of all shapes and sizes and all kinds of industries. I mean, some of our largest clients were thousands of employees, but we had clients that were as small as just a few people. But I would say where kind of our sweet spot tended to be was with employers between maybe 50 and 500 employees. They were large enough to do some really kind of creative and customized things with their programs. They weren't served well by the big house brokers who weren't able or willing to do those types of things for these mid-market companies. And the smaller independent brokers didn't have the expertise or the sophistication, right, to implement these types of strategies.
So let's level set for a lot of people who are listening. So most entrepreneurs, you own a business, you're required by the Affordable Care Act to provide benefits if you're over a certain number of employees. I can't remember what the threshold is. Is it like 20 or somewhere?
50 full-time FTEs.
Okay, yeah. So 50 full-time employees. Under the 50 full-time employees, your employees are able to go to the exchange. They are able to go and buy their own health insurance plans. Above 50, you as the employer are required to provide them an employer plan. So that's why you're saying you targeted 50 was sort of the minimum up to 500 employees. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think just the types of strategies that we were really differentiated in offering fit well for that type of company or that size of company. We were able to bring essentially the strategies and the solutions that really large companies out there were implementing down market to serve that, employer group of a few hundred employees, for example.
Can you describe, if I'm an employer and I go out, what's the difference between being self-funded and just having a regular insurance plan?
So one of the things I would say is even if you have a regular kind of traditional fully insured plan, in my mind, it's important for people to think about the fact that really at the end of the day, everybody's self-funded. You're shouldering the cost of these programs. And one way or another, right, you're gonna end up paying. It's just kind of a difference in the financing mechanism. And so for a partially self-funded plan, and I say partially self-funded because there are protections built in, right? There's reinsurance and stop loss protections built into those plans to protect an employer from large catastrophic claims or just generally really high utilization. But the idea is, as opposed to paying a whole bunch of premium to an insurance carrier, right? And then hoping that, things go well there and they treat you right and they price their policies fairly and so on. At least for the smaller dollar claims, the majority of stuff that's coming through, you actually are just paying dollar for dollar, funding those expenses as they happen. And so there's cost savings to be had in doing that and doing that right. But beyond that, there's also an incredible amount of flexibility and customization that can go into the process because you're not buying that shelf product, right? That's just built the way the carriers built it. You can plug and play and design and really put a program in place that meets the needs of your employees and meets the needs, kind of the goals and objectives that you might have as a business.
Let me see if I can explain it. And then you'll be like, okay, that was really dumb, but it's a starting point. So here's what I got. So if you're a company over 50 and you need to provide health insurance for your employees, typically what will happen is you'll go to, let's just say, United Healthcare. I know that there's nuances to this, but for argument's sake, You go to United Healthcare and you say, hey, this is my employee population. I need an insurance plan. And so they'll look at your employee population. They'll take some of that data based on age, weight, demographics, income levels, et cetera. And they will say, based on our underwriting models, this is the estimate of what your employee contributions and the employer contributions will be. Actually, even before that, they just say, this is the estimate of the per employee cost. And then you as the employer can make a decision of what the employee versus employer contributions will be. Cool.
Right.
The self-funded model is you're not going to UHC or United Healthcare. You are the insurance company essentially. And so any claims that come in, you as the employer are paying, right? And typically what will happen is these insurance companies, they underwrite it and they say, this is our estimate based on our underwriting models and the actuarial tables that we have. And then at the end of the year, their hope is that they're keeping the delta. They want to, that was their estimate. If they can keep it under that estimate, then they make money. And so essentially what you're doing is you're removing them as providing the estimate, and you're allowed to, hopefully, if you're self-funded, keep those savings. Did I explain it somewhat accurately?
That was awesome. And for a lot of our clients, they might buy actually bits and pieces of what a United Healthcare, for example, has to offer. So there's all these different components that make up the program, right? And there might be some things that a large insurance carrier offers that are really helpful. In some cases, for example, their provider network, where we're actually buying access to that provider network and picking up on the very same pricing, the discounts and the negotiated agreements that United has with the provider community. But we're paying just a small fraction of what would otherwise be a premium for access to that network. And then we're kind of plugging and playing with other components where we feel like there's better options, kind of best in class that we can.
Your business was, if I again, going with the analogy, I'm the business owner and there's United Healthcare. You were the broker helping the business navigate and understand, okay, which insurance company should I go with? That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were essentially kind of an intermediary, right, between these service providers, insurance companies, and others, and the employer groups themselves.
So how did you make money?
Yeah. So, depending really on the client arrangement, we could either earn a commission that was paid to us by those carriers and those vendors, or we could be paid a consulting fee directly by our clients. The more upmarket you go, for example, the more typical it would be to see a consulting fee type arrangement. For smaller plans, the commissions were most commonly paid as like a PEPM, a per employee per month fee.
So you would actually be incentivized PDPM? Well, I'm thinking PDPM, that's a healthcare side, but per member per month?
Yeah, per member per month, per employee per month. And again, that was generally for, I'd say, smaller plans where those commissions were paid by the client, but through the carrier or the insurance provider. For a lot of our clients, especially as you go up market, it would become more common to be paid a consulting fee directly from the client.
I love these businesses, but Chris, my business partner, he'd be half asleep by this point. Actually, he probably would have been asleep for the last 5 minutes.
Dull businesses are some of the greatest businesses.
I know.
It's not sexy,
but you went to Stanford. You're a Stanford MBA. You're in Silicon Valley. You're around really smart people. You could have gone into any tech company. Why the freak did you move to Denver and decide to work in this space? Like this is not a sexy space. This is not a, hey, we have SaaS-like margins and the multiples are incredible. And you know what I mean? Like how did you go from Stanford to this space?
So it's actually a really interesting story.
All right, now's the part of the show where I feel the most uncomfortable, but my therapist says I need to face my fears. So here we are. I've started a newsletter and I want you to subscribe. And what you're going to get every single week are the aggregated conversations from that week that I have on this podcast with an overview of what their business actually looks like. I'm also going to throw in a review of 1 or 2 businesses that are listed for sale. I'll give you my opinion on whether or not the EBITDA multiple is good, or there's customer concentration, or there's red flags or green flags. And then lastly, I'm going to give you one piece of actionable advice every single week on how to buy your first business. So click the link below, subscribe to my newsletter, and let's get back into the show.
So I was applying to MBA programs out of undergrad, not really understanding at the time the value of work experience prior to going in and getting involved with an MBA program. And I actually received a deferred enrollment from Stanford where they said, hey, go out, work for a year, do anything you want, essentially, and then come back and you're guaranteed admission to kind of next year's class. And so I was kind of left with this year of having to do something. My father had worked in the industry his whole career. Over many years, he built a insurance brokerage, and that company, was sold. It went through a series of mergers and acquisitions. And when he had completed his time there, we decided, just as I was kind of graduating undergrad, that it would be fun to do something together. Both my brother and I had an interest in doing something entrepreneurial. So my brother joined us a couple years later. And after my dad phased out of the business, my brother and I actually ran it together for quite a while.
That's interesting. Harvard has a similar program. It's a 2+2 program where essentially like you get in, you work for 2 years, and then you go to business school, but this is a 1-year thing.
Well, it was actually a 2-year thing. And so it was interesting. I was applying to other business schools and getting some pretty decent offers, even out of undergrad. And so I kind of thought again at the time, not knowing what I didn't know, that, well, I'll just take advantage of one of those nice scholarships and the rest.
Yeah.
So I went to Stanford to visit, and I sat down with the dean of admissions. And because I kind of had already decided that it wasn't something I was going to do, I actually negotiated with him down to 1 year, which looking back is not something that you do. It's not something I'd recommend, but I kind of figured like worst case, right? Like I go somewhere else and it's no big deal.
What did you think you were going to do? You didn't think you were going to go to Stanford?
No, I thought I'd go maybe somewhere else.
Where?
I had offers from a number of other business schools.
Stop being modest. Where else did you have offers from?
I was on the wait list at HBS at the time. I had offers from some schools out in Chicago, from Thunderbird down in Arizona.
Yeah.
There were a number of options that I had. And I mean, Stanford was my first choice, but I didn't want to wait. And looking back on it now, it all worked out exactly the way that it should have, and was super beneficial the way that it played out. But yeah, we started the company in 2008 when I was kind of waiting on that 1 year to pass. And I worked even while I was out at Stanford. I kind of worked for the company from afar on various projects and things, and then kind of returned after graduation and picked up where
How does it work? Did your dad have a book of business that you guys worked from, or was it like, hey, I'll show you the ropes, this is how you do it?
He more or less showed us the ropes. We started from scratch. His prior company was sold, and he wasn't involved there anymore. So we started from scratch. But I mean, that was crucial, right? Like just having somebody who knew the business, that had relationships, that had experience. I mean, it was super generous and super kind of him to get involved. And he did it because he wanted to help my brother and I out. So
was that weird for you? Was there any like, I don't want my dad helping me out?
No, I don't think so. And I can see how that could be the case. And I don't know, maybe at times I felt a little bit of that, but I think regardless of whether it's family or somebody else, right? Some other mentor, coach, leader, like we all need help to to kind of move along that path and in that journey. Like you can't do it alone. And so it was actually a super awesome experience. Like being involved in a family business is challenging in a lot of ways, and there are definitely some unique dynamics to work through, but it was an amazing experience being able to do that together.
The reason I ask is my own pride is like, I have two brothers that went to Oxford University, very accomplished lawyers, tons of connections. And for whatever reason, I just was like, I don't want to ask them. No, that's the easy way out. And now looking back, I'm like, you're such an idiot. Why would you not take advantage of every opportunity that's open to you? So I'm glad to hear that you were emotionally mature about it and did not view it like I did. What did you do when you went back? So you came back, you and your brother started it, you spent a year on it, and then you went back to school and just let it run, or were you running it while you were getting your MBA?
So my dad was still involved at the time. He over those initial few years, he kind of phased himself out, but he was still involved at the time. And then my brother came into the business, and we had a team. We began hiring folks that were going to help us, especially on the service side of things. And so they were working diligently at the business, and I was doing the best I could from Northern California.
Yeah.
And then when I came back, we were kind of firing on all cylinders at that point.
So you've done what many people dream of doing, right? Started a business, grew a business, sold a business. Except there is one thing that you do that I hate when I hear people say that they're going to do, which is like, I just hired an operator. I think that's the dumbest thing. Anybody who's like, oh, I'll buy a business and hire an operator. It's like, okay, good luck. You didn't necessarily do that. But the point I'm making is, how did you architect it? Because a lot of people are thinking about this as they're getting started. How did you architect it in a way where you could go get your MBA and still be helpful to the business? Because theoretically got this business that's just getting started, it's scaling, you've now got employees, but you've got to get your MBA. How did you construct it in a way that allowed you to do both?
Yeah, again, I think that's where my father and my brother shouldered the heavy load during that period of time. I mean, even beyond that, this is a relationship business. I mean, when you go out and you sell your services, what people are really buying is you. Your ability to provide guidance and advice and consultative services that are going to be beneficial to them. So there's really no, selling something and then just turning it over to the team to handle, right? And
Right.
being no longer involved. You're intricately and intimately involved in the entire process and the entire client relationship from start to finish. And so, yeah, so during that period of time, it was them. And when I came back, we did it together. And
Was there tension there where it's like, oh, must be nice, Chris is getting his MBA and we're over here doing all the work? Or like, how did you guys work through those dynamics? I could just imagine having had partners before, that could have been an issue.
yeah, you'd probably have to ask somebody else that question to really get a truthful answer. I think it worked. My brother, when we started in 2008, my brother was actually still finishing up his undergrad. So he came into the business a little bit later. So that year, for example, that I was working, he was still at school doing his thing. And again, I think as it relates to my father, like we're just incredibly fortunate. He did this. He got involved out of the goodness of his heart, right? He didn't have to get back involved. In fact, he probably didn't really want to. Like he'd already lived that, done that.
Yeah.
Didn't need to do it again. But he wanted to provide us with that opportunity. And so, yeah, incredibly grateful to him. And it all worked out in the end.
Do you think you were lucky, or do you think there's anything that you did with your brother in particular that allowed you guys to have a good working relationship?
I think, at least the way I always thought about it, we had to be incredibly intentional about the way we went about things, because I mean, there will be, and there are, and there have been just those situations that come up where you think about things differently. You have a different perspective, you have a different opinion.
And then you
And
couple the fact that your family, like it's,
yeah, and to kind of balance or to keep things in perspective, for me, it was always these family relationships are more important than anything else. And so whatever happens in the business, right, good and fine, and we'll work through it. But we've kind of got to leave it there, right, and not let it impact the rest of the family dynamic. And that's much easier said than done, right? Like that takes that takes real intentionality and real discipline. But I think that's key when you're involved in working with family.
I just think getting into entrepreneurship, especially if you have a partner, you don't understand how hard it gets. Like there will be moments where one of you is doing more than the other, or at least perceived to be doing more than the other. And like, how do you address those? How do you work through it? How do you communicate? How do you even communicate up front who's doing what? And I've just seen that so many times. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of that so many times, where if you don't have clear expectations going into it, it can cause a big problem. So that,
And clearly defined roles and responsibilities, right? Understanding from the outset, here's what each of us is responsible for, and where we're going to spend our time and our energy, and staying in our lane, right? And trusting and relying on your partner to kind of manage their own roles and responsibilities.
give me an idea, just because I think it'll set better context for as we talk about this. So you start in 2008, you go and get your MBA. When did you sell the business?
Late 2018. And then I stayed on with the company, working for our parent company at that point for about 5 years before I left last year.
Can you give me an idea of how big the business was when you sold? Either, I mean, revenue would be great. I know sales
Yeah.
price would be nice, but I don't think you want to disclose that. Just anything that kind of gives some context there.
At the point of sale, we were doing about 16 million in top line revenue.
Wow.
We had really healthy margins. That's one of the really attractive things I think about this particular type of business and industry.
Those businesses are usually like 40% margins starting out, right? Like you can get higher than that, but is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
So obviously it's, a service organization. So there's not a ton of overhead and fixed expense. I think industry wide margins in the 30 to 40% range are pretty common. We were actually pretty unique in how we ran our agency, and our margins actually were up in the 60+% range.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
I just got intimidated. Oh boy.
No, I think part of it was we were just super disciplined in running the business very lean, right? And we took a ton
Wow.
upon ourselves as owners. But There were some other contributing factors, unique things. I'll tell you about one of them. So we became incredibly proficient in this stop loss space, right? Which again is kind of one of the components of what we were doing for our self-funded clients.
Talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
You're self-funding your health plan, but you're still ceding risk to an insurance company just for the really large
Got it.
shock type catastrophic claims.
Yep. Somebody gets cancer and it's like really expensive, or they
Really
have
expensive, and you
ongoing
don't
illness.
want something like that. You want to take advantage of all the benefits of self-funding, the cost efficiencies, the economics, the flexibility, but you don't want a situation like that that's unpredictable and unexpected to come and just blow up your plan, or maybe even blow up your business. So you purchase reinsurance or stop loss for those types of situations, which isn't your full premium, right? It's just a small percentage of your overall plan cost specifically for that type of protection. We actually, at one point in time, acquired an MGU, managing general underwriter, a company that specializes in underwriting stop loss policies and processing claims. So that was something
Wow.
we acquired and we built and we grew, and we sold that a few years ago too, to a different buyer. But anyways, this was just an area that we became kind of really focused on and proficient in. And over time, we started to actually build relationships with brokers who would utilize us to help them secure stop loss coverage for their clients. And we became kind of a back room of sorts for brokers and TPAs, third party administrators across the country. And for us, this was extremely profitable business, really high margin, because we weren't involved in the day-to-day servicing of those accounts, right? But it was a really critical part of the business for these brokers and TPAs, because it was essentially what allowed them to renew and retain business.
Hmm.
And so there were things like that we did that were a little bit uncommon and unique that allowed us to be very profitable. And
Well, and it's similar to, like, there are examples of companies who've taken large cost centers to them and turned them into profit centers. So an example of this would be Amazon. Amazon had a ton of hosting costs, right? They have to have a ton of servers because of their business. So they decided to start Amazon Web Services. They invested a bunch in Amazon Web Services, and now they're selling that cloud space to a lot of other people. And that's literally the most profitable segment of their business. And it sounds like you did a similar thing, right? Like, hey, this is a cost center to us. We got to make sure we're really good with the stop loss reinsurance. And you got so good at it that people started then coming to you, and you were able to offer that as another service to them.
yeah, and it was a pretty unconventional move, because, I mean, there's a lot of retail brokers out there, and then there's wholesalers out there, but nobody was really trying to do both. And one of the main reasons that you wouldn't consider doing both is because, if you're a broker and going to outsource this critical aspect of your business, you wouldn't want to do so to a competitor, right? For example. And so anyways, that took kind of some working through. And at the end of the day, I think that type of concern was unfounded. I would tell our broker partners all the time, for example, that the minute we kind of took advantage of the situation, right, tried to steal a client or whatever the case might be, like, that was the same minute we no longer had a business, because nobody would ever work with us again.
Yeah.
But it really came down to the reputation we had as a firm and as people, those relationships of trust. And we built incredible partnerships with other brokers across the industry, and always just had to really stay true to our word and do things right. And that was actually a big boost for us in terms of one of the ways we grew our business.
Man, there's a ton of questions I have because I want to know how you grew, but I don't think I have enough time for all of that stuff. Here's what I really want to know. $16 million a year revenue, 60% margins. Cool. So it's $8 million a year profit. Why would you ever sell? I mean, that just seems like you just have a money printing machine. It's healthcare, so it's sticky. Now, it could be you're like, I got an offer I couldn't refuse, which is totally reasonable as well. But
Yeah.
like, why? Like, how did you and your brother, after building this company to where it is, get to a place where you're like, maybe we should sell? Like, what was the motivation behind that?
First of all, we weren't planning to sell or looking to sell or even maybe wanting to sell when we did. I mean, there were a number of factors, way more again than we probably have the time to get into. But I think one thing that I'd mention is we actually fell in love with Acrisure, who acquired us, and the business model, the opportunity that we had to become part of something even bigger. Business model, at least at the time, was they were buying quality agencies that were growing. They were allowing them to really run autonomously And so, we were getting kind of all the advantages of running our own business, but also the resources that were available with just a really good, great, big company, offloading all the administrative stuff, HR, payroll, accounting, those types of things that we really weren't very good at to begin with. But also resources that we were able to provide to clients in the form of legal and compliance and some of those types of things. For us, Acrisure was kind of the best of both worlds, where we got to continue to run our business, continue to do what we loved doing for clients, while at the same time tapping into these resources. And a significant portion of the purchase price was actually paid in the form of company stock. So
They're publicly traded?
they are not.
Oh,
They're a private company, a huge private company at this point, but we reinvested into the company, right? So we were able to take some chips off the table while at the same time kind of reinvesting into the company and wait for maybe even a bigger liquidity event, which, by the way, we're still waiting for.
you went to Harvard, not Harvard, you went to Stanford, right? Roll-ups are a thing. Like, if you have the cash coming in the way that you were, why not take that cash and just do your own roll-up? Like become, is it Acrisure? How do you say it?
Acrisure. Yeah.
Acrisure. Yeah. Why not become them? Like, why make the decision to sell? Why not make the decision to double down and grow?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think there were other reasons at the time that just started to make sense to sell the business. And I think one of those was, and you know this, you've been involved in these types of companies. Like you can only go for so long. I mean, grinding the way that we were, there's a real sense of burnout and the stress and the pressure and just, I mean, everything that goes into it. It was a lot, right? And it was a sacrifice. It was a sacrifice well worth. But I think there was also kind of a time when I realized that like there were other aspects of my life that were really being neglected and that I wanted to focus on and I wanted to pay more attention to. And so
Can you talk about some of those?
typical stuff, right? Family. Like I've got 5 kids. My wife's amazing. I wasn't around for those years. And again, I think at the end of the day, I'm incredibly grateful for what it was and the experience I had. I actually had a business school professor who gave me the advice once to front load your career and just make those sacrifices early on, right? That we're going to pay dividends for years and years to come, which is essentially what I feel like I've done. But yeah, I was looking forward to the opportunity to kind of restore some balance in my life, focus on my own personal well-being and health, pay attention to some of those family dynamics, right? And be there for my kids in a way that
So I have 4 boys under 10, right? So they're all really young. I was talking to this entrepreneur yesterday, and he has a company I think he does like $300,000 a year in revenue, right? So it's not a big company. And then after expenses, I don't know, he's probably netting 50 to 100,000. I didn't know exactly where he is, but this guy's not making mega bucks, but he's like, I love it. I control my schedule. It's amazing. I'm doing something that I love. And he's like, it's not success, but like it is for me. And I like had to stop him. I'm like, man, that's success. Like, don't ever tie it to a specific dollar amount. Like if you can control your schedule and you're investing in the relationships that you want, like that is something that Elon Musk and Warren Buffett, maybe not Warren Buffett, but Bill Gates and all those guys, that they will never have. And it's enough because they're always going to be chasing that. And that was important to me when I sold. It's like, okay, I need to reprioritize some things in my life. So I think it's really important to say what you just said, because you could double down. You could have gone and done a roll-up strategy. You could have gone and consolidated a bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're looking at it and you're like, I only have so much time. Where am I going to spend it?
Yeah. Which, by the way, that's the title of my new book. It's about time.
That's hilarious. I wish that could say I was planned and strategic enough to say it's about time.
I appreciate it. I wasn't even necessarily going to mention it, but yeah, that's something I've been doing a lot of this past year is writing. And my first book's actually going to be released in the next few weeks. And it's a lot about that, right? Like how do we find meaning and purpose in what we're doing and in where we're spending our time? And a lot of it's just my real life lived and learned experiences, personally and professionally. And I think this opportunity now to reflect back on this entrepreneurial journey and everything that took place, there's a lot of lessons learned and some things that I would have, of course, done differently and some things that I want to do differently and am doing differently now. And especially at kind of this season in my life.
Any regret coming out of Stanford, not going into tech?
Yeah, I think about that. I think about that from time to time.
I'm gonna guess. Do you have any classmates who just like
I've
are
got classmates
billionaires? They're
that
probably
have made
billionaires.
it made it big. I also have classmates, though. I will say, I mean, I think everybody that comes out of Stanford Business School is successful, right? At some level, like they're achieving success, whatever their definition of that is. But there's also folks out there that, I mean, similar to your friend that you just mentioned talking to, right? That haven't made it huge, right? And maybe they've tried and failed, or are still working towards that. So you just never know. I've always been kind of envious of tech businesses because of the scalability and like operating a service business. Like
Oh,
we
man.
grew and we scaled, and I think we did phenomenally well. But scaling a service business like that is just brutal. I mean, such a grind. And
I don't think people understand that because what is your product? Essentially, it's people. It's good people that are providing the service. I grew a home health and hospice to $12 million. And it's freaking hard because you can only grow if you hire good people. And you're probably in a similar boat. Software, it's like, all right, I build it one time and there has to be product market fit. And there's probably other things that obviously we don't know or familiar with that are a pain
but
in
if
the
you
butt.
get it right, it can happen quick, right? You
Yeah.
give that a few months, a year, a couple years,
Yeah.
like.
But services businesses, people-based businesses, those are hard. Those are really, really hard. So I totally agree with that.
But I love the business of people, and that was one of the things I loved about this industry and the business that we built was it was a relationship business. It was a people business, and just the interactions with customers and clients, but vendors and service providers and employees, the opportunity to really kind of um, work with amazing individuals and make a difference. Like that was something that was always felt very meaningful to me.
Okay, give me some red meat. Did you have any offers from companies coming out of Stanford or any friends that were like, "Oh, you should come work at this company called Airbnb with me"?
I had some offers and some options. And again, like looking back on my story, right? We had already started this company. So I was in kind of a unique situation where it was like could have gone and done something different. Like it would have been it would have been fine. But I had already kind of in a sense committed myself to this was something I wanted to do. This was a path that I wanted to take. I'll tell you one quick story that was um, this one was maybe a little bit hard to turn down, but I'd always been kind of intrigued by sports management, and I've been a sports fan my whole life. I'm a big hockey fan, and I did a project while I was out at the GSB for one of the owners of the San Jose Sharks, and kind of organized a group of students. We were looking at collective bargaining agreement nuances and just
Yeah.
terms and things. And anyways, it was a lot of fun, like sitting in the owner's box and watching these hockey games. And the project that we actually completed, it was shared ultimately with a number of teams in the NFL and the MLB and the NBA. And anyways, I got a job offer from Kevin, which was kind of who we were working with on this project. And like I knew at the time, and I still know looking back, like it wasn't the right fit. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. It just wasn't the environment, the culture, it wasn't going to be lifestyle, right? That I was
Yeah.
looking for. But that was a little hard to turn down because that was just such kind of a unique and opportunity that was in an industry and in a space that like I've always just been intrigued by.
So how are you thinking about what's next? You're doing one of the two things that are my business bucket lists. So there's two business bucket lists. I want to be a professor at a university. Adjunct is fine. I think you're doing adjunct.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
So it's on my bucket list. The other thing on my bucket list is I want to buy a company for parts. I don't know why, but I just want to like somebody's like, I'm shutting it down. You can have this thing for, $200,000 and then, it turns into a $5 million company, whatever. I just think that would be so fun to like try to figure out, is there something here? Anyways, you're living one of my two bucket lists. I'm curious, like what are you focusing on now? Like what's next for you?
Yeah. I think it's still a work in progress. I'm doing some consulting. I'm doing some advising. I'm working with some clients on some things. I'm adjunct professing. I'm writing. I think I mentioned to you, I'm actually most the way through my second book, which I don't know.
What's the second one?
So the second one is on character, and again, same concept, right? Just personal and professional experiences, lessons learned when it comes to developing character and living the type of character that we intentionally choose in our lives. But so that takes time, writing and publishing. So I'm trying to do things in a more balanced way, but it's been a lot of fun because it feels a little bit more project based, if you will, where I can kind of spend time where and when I want to on kind of a variety of things. Whereas when I was really kind of in it with the benefits business, I was all in. You had to be, and that was kind of the primary and really the sole focus at the time.
Looking back, is there any tactical advice either you would give to yourself, your pre-entrepreneurial self, or just somebody who's looking to get in to entrepreneurship and is looking at you and like, man, that guy did it the way I want to do it? What advice would you give to people? Or like, what do you think people miss as they're thinking about getting into entrepreneurship that you wish you would have known earlier on?
I mean, it's not super tactical or technical, but I will say just more in terms of the experience being an entrepreneur. There's a quote that I love by Mark Twain that goes, "I'm an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened." And I feel like that defines my entrepreneurial journey. Like so much pressure, so much stress. But looking back now, I can hardly think of anything that really was so consequential long term, right? That it matters today. I think for anyone starting a company, buying a company, kind of in those early stages, like just keeping perspective and understanding and realizing that there's going to be a lot of challenge and there's going to be a lot of adversity, but you'll get through it, right? And most of what is keeping you up at night and really causing you like heartache, give it a few months, right? Or a few years at most.
I
And
heard
I mean,
I heard Tom Hanks gave a quote. Like there's a video of him talking and he's like, things suck right now. It's the worst it's ever been. Give it time. And
yeah,
then he's like, you're on top of the world. You made $1 million. You're amazing. Give it time.
give it
You know what I
time.
mean? He's just like the highs and the lows kind of even out over time. That was a good quote that I really like. One of the things that I struggle with though with that is I feel like it's easy now to be like, hey, just relax a little bit. But looking back, I don't know if I would have been as successful, if I would have been able to do the things that I needed to do without some of that stress. So it's like it's such a hard balance. I fully agree with that. 99% of the things that you thought were going to happen never actually happened. But at the same time, it's such a motivator.
Well, a lot of the stressors too are stuff that's outside your control, right? Focusing
Mm,
on those things that are within your control, I think, is one thing. But stuff would come up. We started our company in 2008, which was a really interesting time to start a company because
great
we're
year.
right in the midst of the Great Recession. Like that said, it turned out to be a huge advantage for us because the economy was not in a great place. A lot of companies were out there struggling, and our whole business model was focused on finding savings for plan sponsors and more effectively managing their employee benefit plan costs. We were getting opportunities to talk with companies that probably would have never entertained a conversation with us at any other point in time. When things are going well economically and businesses weren't feeling kind of so constrained financially, they're much less inclined to make changes or consider things that even if there are savings to be had. And another example of that, when the ACA was passed in 2010, right, this was a huge concern. Nobody really knew what it meant for the industry, what it meant for their business, but people weren't feeling great about it. And as it turns out, it actually turned out to be a huge boost for our business, where employer groups had to more heavily rely on their brokers and their consultants digging into compliance and new legislative requirements and navigating a more complex healthcare environment. I mean, there were guys out there that closed up shop and decided like this wasn't what they signed up for. This wasn't what they wanted to do. Maybe they were kind of in their sunset years and just didn't want to invest the time and the energy into it. And for the rest of us, for us at least, like this whole deal expanded the industry, and it started out as this huge like concern and challenge and something we were trying to figure out like how are we gonna get through it, or what are we gonna pivot to and
Yeah.
do when our business is kind of a moot point.
What percentage of your success would you say is luck? And what percentage would you say is you, hard work?
A healthy dose of both. I don't know.
Okay.
I I'd probably, because it's what I see and know kind of the most about. I'd probably say it was a large percentage hard work and just grit and grind and hustle. But I'm sure I'm totally underestimating the luck part.
I think that like Paul Graham has a quote that's like, the industry or the wave that you're riding is way more important than the business, right? Like you get into healthcare 2008. First of all, you start a business in 2008. It's probably these economic downturns are some of the best times to start businesses because there's like not really any lower you can go. right?
Yeah. I mean, there's
So
a ton of opportunity that's born out
ton
of
of
those
opportunity.
fixes.
And then the Affordable Care Act gets passed in 2010. And it's like, now, unfortunately, premiums have skyrocketed, but there's also been a ton of need for your services, right? And it's like, you wouldn't have known that sitting in business school, mapping it out, saying like, oh, we're going to have these huge tailwinds. You didn't even know it at the time once it was passed until it was actually implemented, that in hindsight, you've been able to look back and see it was successful. So I obviously, you're super smart. You had good experience. You work hard. Like that's a given. But there are these like little pieces as well that you're like, man, if that wouldn't have happened in that way at that moment, I don't know if I'd be sitting here the way that I am. So I like that
Nobody
stuff.
else from my business class that I'm aware of went into insurance. It just isn't
That doesn't happen.
not one of those industries that people are looking at
Uh,
and jumping into, but
well,
it's
this is rad, man.
great
When did
business.
your book come out?
Releases December 10th.
Okay, December 10th. It's about
Available for pre-orders currently, anywhere books are sold.
okay.
I'm super excited about it. It's been a really fun project to work on.
Okay.